Welcome to another episode of The Dissection. As you know by now, there was a significant dismissal of a deputy minister this week. President Cyril Ramaphosa fired the deputy minister, Andrew Whitfield, from his position in the Ministry of Trade, and the Democratic Alliance threw a fit. John Steenhuisen issued a statement announcing that they were issuing a 48-hour ultimatum for the president. 48 hours. That's how much they gave him. And they said, if you don't take the appropriate actions, you're going to see. You're going to see. They threatened the president with a beef steak. And what they delivered today was boiled vegetables. That's the only way of putting it. The ultimatum, when it was issued by John Steenhuisen in a statement, said the following. This is part of what was said when the ultimatum was issued. Listen to this. Given the flagrant double standard, one is left with no choice but to conclude that hard-working DA members of the executive are now being fired for fighting corruption, not for committing corruption, for being good at their jobs rather than being incompetent. The DA therefore call on the president to fire Simelane, Nkabane, Mahlobo, and other ANC ministers and deputy ministers implicated in corruption within the next 48 hours. Then here comes the critical part. If they fail to do so, the ANC will inflict grave consequences on South Africa. Make no mistake about it. What happens next is entirely on the ANC and President Ramaphosa. They did not have to do this. They triggered all the events that follow. Should the ANC fail to meet our ultimatum, all bets are off and the consequences will be theirs to bear. However, this is the moment of truth. Within the next 48 hours, we will find out if the DA stands alone as the only party that can be trusted to govern responsibly and take South Africa forward. These are fighting words. This is Pumasilwe language, right? And for the international audiences, come outside, let's fight. This is Royal Rumble language. This is WWE SmackDown language. But what was announced today was anticlimactic. The DA overpromised. What they were saying they're going to do versus what they announced today. It's the difference between a biscuit and a loaf of bread, I tell you. The DA announced today that they will not be taking part as a result of the president blue-ticking them again. They said they will not be taking part in the national dialogue. This is their response. This is what they spent the last 48 hours hyping up. All the media houses showed up. People were watching their live announcement, wondering, is the GNU going to fall apart? Is the Rand going to be affected? Are there going to be serious consequences and repercussions? Have you ever watched the movie Life? Eddie Murphy and is it Benny Merck? I think it's Benny Merck. And in the movie, at some point, somebody takes Eddie Murphy's bread. He's like, are you going to eat that bread? And then Eddie Murphy's like, yeah, I'm going to eat the bread. And then the guy as he's taking the bread, Eddie Murphy threatens him. He says, there's going to be consequences and repercussions if anybody takes this cornbread, this here cornbread. There's going to be consequences and repercussions. That's exactly what John Steenhuisen was sounding like. Listen to this. If they fail to do so, the ANC will inflict grave consequences on South Africa. Make no mistake about it. What happens next is entirely on the ANC and President Ramaphosa. So this whole thing that you were threatening is this. This is the thing. Let me play you what John Steenhuisen said. I just can't believe this is how they went with it. Let me play you what he said as this is their big moment. This is what we waited 2 days for them to announce. Here it is.
This flagrant double standard that protects the likes of Simelane and Nkabane, but acts against Whitfield, proves that in the ANC's universe, the only things you dare not be are competent, honest, and hardworking. But sadly, this is not an isolated incident. It is about a pattern of disrespect, arrogance, and double standards. The ANC has refused to implement Clause 19.3 of the Statement of Intent that requires sufficient consensus to resolve disputes, directly undermining the GNU and the original Statement of Intent. And the president's now refusal to act against corruption within his own ranks, but singling out as a priority a DA deputy minister, risk confirming that his oft-repeated public commitment to clean governments is a sham. Until he replaces words with action against corruption with his own ranks, the DA sees no further point in wasting our breath in endless talk shops with the ANC. For that reason, the Democratic Alliance's federal executive, which met at 1 p.m. today, has resolved to withdraw from the national dialogue with immediate effect. In the absence of a president who's prepared to take action against VBS looters and state capture accused sitting around the cabinet table, it is clear that the dialogue will be reduced to nothing more than a waste of time and money to distract from ANC failures. And this explains why they are so obsessed with it. It's clearly an electioneering ploy at taxpayers' expense to gloss over the serious crises that they have plunged South Africa into. The dialogue also has no constitutional standing whatsoever to take or impose decisions.
It was all a dream, as BIG would say. We thought they were going to do something, but the reality is this. The hype was bigger than the moment. They overpromised and they underdelivered. And what we can see right now is that the Democratic Alliance is demonstrating maximum kwababa to leave the GNU. Peak kwababa. And that's fear for the international audience. I must shout out the international audience. We have people watching from Australia, from America, Donald Trump's America, from the UK. Top of the morning to you. And we've got people watching from all across Africa. So thank you so much for tuning in. Kwababa is fear. The Democratic Alliance is demonstrating maximum kwababa to leave the GNU. I thought at the very least that they would pursue legal action. Right? At least pursue. Saying you're going to leave the national dialogue, we already know the national dialogue is not a serious conversation. And we already know that you were skeptical of the national dialogue. So saying that you're going to leave the thing that you weren't even taking seriously as a pushback against your minister being fired is, what is it? It's diluted Oros, man. This is the most dilute Oros that I've ever seen in terms of reactions. It's a very timid response is what I'm trying to put across. And I'm going to postulate why I think this response has been so timid. I think that there was an appetite going in to react in a manner which was dramatic because I think the DA understands that they are losing leverage now post the budget process and they want to play a bigger role. But their pushback efforts have not been successful. They were more successful with the issue of the VAT because they could block that particular budget vote and prevent the VAT being increased. But now when it comes to the other issues that they're pushing, Expropriation Act opposition, Bella Bill opposition, health insurance opposition, they've failed to find sufficient leverage. And they've opposed a variety of things like the appointments of certain people to the IDC and also now the lottery's license and the process in which all of that happened. So I think there is an understanding from a political perspective that if you continue to be pushed to the side, you lose a lot of leverage. And there's also an understanding that there's frustration between the ANC and the DA for their opposition and for their behavior. And I think there was an appetite to go. But then over the last 48 hours, the divisions within the DA have really shaped out. So in as much as John was very loud and was threatening, I actually think that the cabinet faction, the members of the DA who are in the cabinet, that they want to actually stay in the cabinet. They want to be ministers. Being a minister is nice, guys. It's a nice thing, that thing. Huh? You got security details, you got blue lights, you get international trips, you have status. You can even be in the White House with a matric certificate. Pure matric. Matric as pure as this water here that I'm drinking. You can be in the White House and then even speaking to Donald Trump. Just with pure matric as a minister. I don't know who that applies to, but being a cabinet minister is it's mnandi, that thing. Let's not lie. So I think that there's some people who want to stay in the cabinet because it's nice to be a minister. Even me, guys, if I became a minister, do you think I'd just walk away from being a minister? Minister Mighty Jamie, Minister of Enjoyment. I'd stay there. I'd also be asking people, check Google. Go to Wits University Library. Go to second floor. Read a book. Hey, let me get serious. Some people say that I'm joking too much. I need to have gravitas. So let me get my gravitas voice on. So I think there are some people within the cabinet faction who actually enjoy the work of being minister and who also believe that they're doing valuable work which will help the Democratic Alliance. And those people would have pushed back to leaving off the GNU. I also think that the markets, the donors, they are big donors. Like if you look at Michel Leroux, Capitec, the Capitec founder, he's spent a lot of money on the Democratic Alliance. I think he's part of the faction who would have said, guys, you need to be calm. Your guy made a mistake. Why were you guys going to the US anyway? So I think there's that collective which doesn't want to leave. And to be quite honest, some of the ministers are doing good work. I'm happy to concede that point and happy to acknowledge that the DA seems to be taking cabinet positions with a much higher level of seriousness, for instance, than Nobuhle Nkabane, who was telling people while chewing bubblegum to check Google and Encyclopedia. Ask Encyclopedia, right? So I think that's a fair thing. But I think that faction or that grouping or that school of thought is at loggerheads maybe with Helen Zille's approach, which seems to be willing to break ties, seems to be willing to really, play the game of chicken and go gung-ho in terms of pushing back. In fact, when I was looking at the body language, she looked very unhappy with the announcements that were being made. And Helen Zille wrote a book called Not Without a Fight. She wants to fight every time, everything that goes down, not without a fight. That's her disposition, right? So I think donors push back, markets push back. I think there were a lot of calls that were received, and so they had to pick something that was symbolic. And by the way, this is exactly what I predicted, some of it, right? If you watch the previous episode, I said, these guys are not going to leave the GNU. And right now, as things stand, because they've done this vacuous ultimatum, they are going to lose a lot of leverage. By the way, the president has given his reasons for the dismissal of the minister. And this is what he said. He confirmed his reasons. He said the following. On 25 June 2025, I removed Andrew Whitfield from the position of Deputy Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition in terms of Section 93(1) of the Constitution. It is not common practice for the President of the Republic of South Africa to provide reasons either for the appointment or dismissal of members of the executive. However, due to several unfortunate statements and outright distortions by a number of people, especially Mr. John Steenhuisen and Mr. Whitfield himself, it is necessary for me to make a public statement on the circumstances surrounding Mr. Whitfield's removal. Mr. Whitfield was removed as deputy minister because he undertook an international visit without the permission of the president. His travel to the United States was a clear violation of the rules and established practices governing the conduct of members of the executive. This requirement is known to all ministers and deputy ministers. These rules and established practices were expressly communicated to all members of the executive during the induction sessions at the commencement of the 7th administration. These rules and practices were repeated in cabinet in March this year by me as president. All international travel by members of the executive must always be undertaken with the express permission of the president. This practice is rigorously observed and adhered to by all members of the executive. However, Mr. Whitfield deliberately chose to violate this rule and practice. Prior to the removal of Mr. Whitfield, I informed Minister John Steenhuisen as the leader of the Democratic Alliance that I had decided to remove Mr. Whitfield from his position as Deputy Minister and that I expect him to present to me for approval a replacement for Mr. Whitfield from his party, as the DA is entitled to a Deputy Minister as agreed. In that discussion, Mr. Steenhuisen informed me that Mr. Whitfield had been expecting that he may be dismissed on the grounds that he had undertaken an international trip without the President's permission. This expectation, along with a perfunctory letter of apology that Mr. Whitfield wrote to me following his travel to the USA without the required permission, indicated that he was aware that his actions had violated the rules and established practices governing the conduct of members of the executive. During my discussion with Mr. Steenhuisen, he asked me if there was precedent for the action that I intended to take in relation to Mr. Whitfield. I informed him that there was indeed prior precedent. I told him that in 1995, President Nelson Mandela dismissed the late Deputy Minister Madikizela Mandela, and that in 2007, President Thabo Mbeki dismissed then Deputy Minister Nosiviwe Madlala Rutledge on the grounds of undertaking international travel without permission. Given all these circumstances, there is consequently no reasonable grounds for Mr. Steenhuisen and the Democratic Alliance to issue ultimatums and threats when the president exercises his constitutional prerogative and responsibility. Nor are there any grounds to try link this with matters that have no bearing on the conduct of the former deputy minister. There is really no basis for suggestions that the dismissal of the former deputy minister is related to any other reason than his failure to receive permission to travel and adhere to the rules and established practices expected of members of the executive of the Republic of South Africa. While Mr. Steenhuisen asked that he be allowed to brief the Democratic Alliance federal executive prior to the removal letter being delivered to Mr. Whitfield, this would have had no bearing on my decision. It is the responsibility and the prerogative of the president to determine the timing and the manner of the appointment and the removal of members of the executive. I am amazed at Mr. Steenhuisen's intemperate reaction to the removal of Mr. Whitfield. He knows very well that the blatant disregard of the rules and practices that govern the international travel of members of the executive is a serious violation that should not be permitted. It is unprecedented in the history of our democracy that the exercise by the president of his constitutional prerogative and responsibility with respect to a clear violation of rules and established practices governing the conduct of members of the executive has met with such irresponsible and unjustifiable threats and ultimatums from a member of the executive. Let it be clear that the president shall not yield to threats and ultimatums, especially coming from members of the executive that he has the prerogative to appoint in accordance with the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. Basically, he's saying, that's what he's saying. You know, Obama had that anger translator who would come in and anger translate. Let me anger translate. He's saying, that's basically what he's saying. Translation is don't come here. Don't try that here, buddy. What is the very UK version of that kind of don't try that here? I don't know. I can't think of it. Maybe you'll tell me in the comments. What do you think of this particular announcement made by the Democratic Alliance? What do you think of the president's explanation? What do you think of the ultimatum? What do you think of everything that has played out? Fundamentally, it looks like the DA has shown that they're willing to take this L. They're willing to eat this L, put some, chili sauce on that L and ingest it. They've shown that. And also, the president did give them a way out, right? He said, look, give me another name. I'll appoint that other name. So I think in that respect, he gave them some saving grace and he gave them a way to face safe. But this particular announcement is very vacuous, is very empty. And I think as a result of that, the Democratic Alliance has lost a lot of credibility. Issuing an ultimatum, I said it before, is always risky because you need to match the threat with action. And this was not a serious consequence, not a serious action, right? The ANC is not worried. I think a lot of people are going to be giggling and perhaps even laughing out loud at the response that the DA has now given, withdrawing from the national dialogue. Having said all of that, I want to agree with the Democratic Alliance that the president needs to take action around the ministers who have been accused of serious things, and that there are ministers within the ANC camp really who have done far worse than Andrew Whitfield's trip to the USA, and that has to be considered. For instance, the Minister of Bubblegum, Encyclopedia, Ask Google, Lahu, that minister has not shown exemplary behavior, right? And you know who I'm talking about by now, Dr. Nobutle Nkabane. She went to Parliament and was asked tough questions by members of the committee that oversees her department, or rather that is in charge of oversight of her department, which is the Higher Education Department. And she could not explain why she had appointed Gwede Mantashe's son and others to these SETA board chairpersonships. Then she lied and said that there was an independent panel. Then she was asked for names of that panel. She said Advocate Terumtau was on the panel. He was like, girl, count me out of your mess. I take a dim view. And then she had to apologize to him. Turns out the other people that she said were part of her independent panel work for her, and they're not independent after all. She was chewing bubblegum, telling people, ask Encyclopedia, check Google. Why are you asking me silly things in this committee? It was quite bizarre to observe. And then you think about Thembisi Melane, she's facing serious accusations around VBS and, taking money from fixers for VBS. These are serious things. These are serious things. The fact that Andrew Whitfield is the first to fall and be removed altogether, while there are ministers who have been implicated in the 7th administration and funny behavior, I think the DA is justified to say, bruh, if you're going to do this, you need to do the same on your side. And I think that's going to leave a sour taste in everybody's mouth. It really is. I think it's going to leave a sour taste in everybody's mouth. But that's where I think things stand right now. Let me know where you guys stand on this whole issue and what you think. Let's have a conversation in the comments. Did you buy this ultimatum? Where do you stand on this whole thing? Let's have a chat. Meet you there in the comments.